I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the March 2nd, 2020 meeting of the Orleans Animal Control and Regulation Task Force. First thing we're going to do is to appoint a clerk for the evening. Who hasn't done it in a while?
I haven't done it in a while. I'll try
Been
it.
a
I'll give it a
while.
shot. Yeah.
Spoke.
Yeah.
Do you need paper?
Therefore,
Nice.
all right. And so why don't we just do take the roll by just saying our names from Ed to Jennifer.
Ed Bagdonis.
Nathan Sears.
Bob Sinclair.
Carl Oakes.
Patty Platten,
David Abel.
Jen Seabeck.
Should we wait for you, or
I'm ready.
you ready? Okay.
Got an echo.
Yeah, you're loud too. Yes.
Are we speaking through a mic that's going to a speaker though?
Apparently.
It is. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's new. All right.
All right. There does not appear to be anyone here for public comment. So let's move on to item 4, which is brief consideration and potential approval of amendments and additions to dog-related bylaws which have made it to the final stage of consideration and related findings. Deferral of any items which cannot be briefly resolved. In other words, if we find ourselves going down a rabbit hole unexpectedly tonight, we can just add whatever it is to our pile of already deferred regulatory changes. So we have 3 items that I'm aware of. One is leaving the scene of a dog attack, which overall we liked, but we needed to do something about subsection 2, which said a violation of this section is a Class D crime, because that's not a thing in Massachusetts. This is a Maine statute. So I have information on Class D crimes, which I'll give you in a moment. Then we had the administrative procedure for closing public property to dogs, and Nate, you were thinking about tweaking that, right?
It was, yeah. I did some
Yeah, okay, cool.
thinking on that.
And then finally, we had license fees, which I think we were okay with. I think we all agreed that we agreed with that as is. And then down below that is just a proposed, one way to go with this, if we're going to turn in these 3 recommendations, would be to also let the select board know what didn't make it through this stage of consideration, but what they can expect us to say more about in the future, whether or not that's an approval or a specific recommendation, we don't know yet. And just to give them this very brief bit of information about these other 6 items that didn't survive the process. So is that all clear and okay so far?
Could 8 be moved up to number 4 also? Could it be included in number 4?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your question. Could you say it
Could
again?
number 8,
Number 8.
control and the issue that Ed and I were working on, could that be moved up to be also considered under number 4?
Are you saying that you're trying to, are you asking me that because your desire would be to try to get a definition of control through tonight to pass on?
I think it would be to show you what we've got, and then we can figure out what to do
It
from
would
there.
be, for consideration and potential approval.
If we get through the other 3 things.
I guess the way I would like to handle that, if it's okay with you guys, would be to keep number 8 where it is, and if we get, and making sure that we're very careful of the way we use our time so that we don't shortchange that, and then to, if we reach a resolution, which might be ambitious, but if we do, then we can certainly drop it into this. Drop it into what we send along. We're going to send something along at the end result of this, but what you're going to propose tonight, it will not have had the benefit of the lengthy kind of repeated consideration that some of these other things are going to have. And I'm concerned about risking kind of blowing up the agenda and ending up not being able to talk about a lot of the other things that that we agreed would have priority on the agenda.
I'm not saying that. If we come to the end of the meeting and we manage to make it through.
Yeah. There's no reason why,
Good.
at that point, we couldn't just add it to what we pass along, yeah.
Yeah,
But, the end of number 4 or the end of the meeting? You said the end of the meeting.
no, I meant, the end of the article number 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, now it's already getting confusing, and, I guess I would say, why don't we just do the agenda as the agenda is organized? Because this is how we talked about organizing it last time.
Right, I guess I was thinking that we were to go away and work on this, to present it today.
You are going to
Okay.
present it today.
Okay, good. Then
Definitely.
let's just move on. This is silly.
Yeah, because numbers 5 and 6 are only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So we're almost to
Yeah,
7.
we'll get there, momentarily.
We're almost. If no one interrupts 5 and 6.
Exactly. So, what I have on, leaving the scene of a dog attack is the following. This is information about what does it mean if something is a Class D crime in Maine. And the first, if you could just pass that down, please. And the first business at the top is from a website. It says Class D offenses include domestic violence, assault cases, assault and OUI, DUI, drunk driving offenses. They carry a maximum penalty of up to 364 days in jail and a fine of up to $2,000. This is a max, of course. And then it just shows you what the A and B and C and D and E crimes are, just so you can kind of see the difference. And then I have some Massachusetts information, leaving the scene of personal injury not resulting in death. And it says the Mass law dictates that any individual, this is not exactly the same. This is a motor vehicle law, excuse me for not saying. So under the motor vehicle code, if you, without stopping and making known his name, residence, and the registered number of his motor vehicle, leaves the scene of an accident after knowingly colliding with or otherwise causing injury to another person not resulting in the death of the person, shall be found in violation of this section. And this is a misdemeanor, and a conviction is punishable by mandatory 6 months and a fine 500 to 1,000. So we have two options here. We can either try to extrapolate from this what should the crime be and what should the punishment be, and the missing piece of information in all of that would be, I don't know what the limit of the town's authority. I kind of tend to doubt that a town can send you to create a crime that sends you to jail for a year, but I don't know. I just didn't have time to do that research. Or we could just pass this information along and say, this is what a Class D crime is, and this is what the leaving the scene is in Massachusetts, and we recommend that you make a penalty decision bearing these things in mind.
I like that approach.
That's what I
reasonable.
personally favor.
And they could change it to E, which might be a little bit more reasonable, since negotiation is the first,
Are you referring to A, B, C, D, E up at the top there?
yes.
Yeah, and again, that's Maine law, so really none of that's really applicable. All I was trying to do was kind of translate what does it mean at the bottom of the statute when it says violation of this section is a Class D crime. In Maine, if you do this, you could theoretically go to jail for up to 364 days and have a fine of $2,000. Not saying that we're suggesting that that should be the crime for leaving the scene of a dog attack by any means, just saying this is information that might be relevant to them in giving their thought to what the penalty should be. So, does anyone want to approach it differently from recommending it and just giving them this information to consider in terms of making their own penalty? Is there anyone who thinks there's a better way to do it than that?
Sorry, giving who the recommendation?
The Board of Selectmen.
I think you should articulate what we're going to say to them, which is basically that we recommend that we have, do not leave the scene of a dog attack, and attached are some possible fines or what have you.
I think it would work something like, we recommend that in cooperation with town council, you draft a law, a bylaw addressing leaving the scene of a dog attack, that you use the Maine statute as a model, and we have provided you with some clarifying information about what a Class D crime is, just for you to consider in terms of setting a penalty. And we've also given you some information about leaving the scene of a car accident, which is a different, but in some ways, analogous crime for you and council to consider in your drafting of the law. Would that be acceptable?
I was just gonna suggest that maybe, I don't disagree with the basic idea of it, is that it might, I don't know the law, I'm not sure if we can actually use the word crime. I'm not sure if it is, but there's a
wouldn't.
concern that if we wanna have something in place that that the town would adopt to address the concern of people not remaining when an incident occurs.
Yeah.
And then, here's some information you could consider.
Right.
But
No, we're saying
probably,
the
it's
same
probably an
thing.
administrative fine of some sort, I'm
Yeah,
gonna guess.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhat outside of our wheelhouse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and we're not proposing that they criminalize the behavior. We're
Yeah.
just proposing that they pass a statute that they pass a bylaw, addressing it, presumably fining it, and we're giving them some background so they can make an intelligent decision about how to
Yeah.
do that.
They might wanna do it in conjunction or relation to other, I don't know, similar issues that the town monitors. So in other words, fine structures usually sort of related to each other. If it's $100 as standard, or maybe the state has a limit as what a fine can be, but they would have to create that.
Yeah, I'm suggesting we not get into those
Yeah,
weeds
I know.
and just give them a little background. All right?
I think it's a good idea that we address the issue of leaving the scene of a dog attack. The question that comes to my mind is, why wouldn't we do what we're saying we want the select board to do?
In terms of trying to figure out a fine? 'Cause-
No, not a fine. Why wouldn't we write what we're recommending for leaving the scene of a dog attack? Instead of us telling the select board to write it. I guess I'm a little uncomfortable putting them to work. They have set us up to do the work.
all right,
So I'm trying to figure out,
so
I think it's a good idea that we address this issue. So why don't we take the information that we have here and us write it?
Well, I would say,
Just use
I'd be
the-
happy letting section 1 be exactly as is. I don't think there's anything wrong with section 1. So it's really just a question of,
That's what I'm looking
do we want to get
is section
into?
What's section 1?
What is section 1?
Subsection 1, we're talking about 3955 of the main laws, okay?
And 1 includes A, B, and C.
1 includes A, B, and C.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to.
And then there's 2.
Yeah, okay.
So what I'm saying is, we recommend, right, that you write a bylaw that looks like 3995-1.
I think the reason
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah.
it would be difficult for us to write that is that we don't know what the town's position on this is. Whether or not town council would immediately want to start to think about it and talk to whoever to make their decision, so. Do you agree with that?
all I can say is that from my point of view, I don't see any reason to play with one. It seems fine. It seems workable. As for two, I feel like it's really beyond my and our real expert. I mean, the amount of time that we would have to go through that to try to figure out what's proportionate to all the other fines in town, and this and that and the other thing. You know, if you want to not pass it on to them, rather, you know, and have us go through that, that's an option, but I don't think we can do it tonight.
But just so I know, you're saying, when you say one, you mean this paragraph says Class D offenses include domestic violence, blah, blah, blah?
No, 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 no.
Where's one?
No,
This
no,
here.
no.
One
No,
required
no,
action.
no.
Oh,
Yeah,
that.
one.
That's why I kept asking,
Yeah,
where's
A,
one?
B, and C, and then there's two.
Sorry.
Different pages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree. That seems simple as an example. I'd give it to them. And if they say, we don't want to do it, why would we waste our
They could always
time?
kick it back to us
Right,
and
they may say we have no intention of doing it, and then you say, okay, well, then why would we waste our time tweaking it?
Yeah, and the other thing is, they could say to us, well, you know.
Take it back.
We like one,
The
but we
stat.
need you to give us a fine number and tell us, specific fine number and tell us why, and we could say, okay, you know, we'll do that.
Are we in agreement that we should have a bylaw about leaving the scene of a dog attack?
Yeah.
Okay. Is everyone in agreement with that?
Who wrote this?
Mhm.
Is that even-
Okay, if we're in agreement with that, what's stopping us from developing the recommendation that we would give to the Board of Selectmen on that issue?
Just uncertainty about what to make the penalty.
Because what we are planning to submit, if I understand it, is what the American Kennel Club had suggested.
This is not the,
It's-
This
well,
is the
they-
thing in Maine? This
It's
is
the,
law in Maine?
yes and no. I mean, they didn't draft it.
Correct.
They saw the one in Maine.
Yeah,
They said, this
suggested
is
it-
good.
it's good to
We
include.
like that. You should do the same thing.
So I think we are giving them, we're giving them those sections, and the only thing we're not doing is coming up with
What, the
the,
decision?
the violation.
Yeah, it's not a
and
Class
what
D
has to-
crime. You know,
What,
it's
yeah,
it's
what,
so it's
what we're
okay.
not assigning a fine amount to it. We're giving them some background that they could use to do that.
So I would delete number 2, so it's very clear what we're giving them, because they're not gonna know. And give them to this, and I put draft on it. That's, from my view, and then not spending more time on it.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Do you mean to this, or to this?
I mean, if we had forever to do it,
Violation.
you know, if we weren't up against, you know,
Maybe we
then
need to
certainly
do it too.
we,
Okay,
There's two.
thank you,
Yeah.
okay.
but, okay. So
now that I
can, does somebody want to move that we do what we just discussed?
I move that we accept leaving the scene of a dog attack, and strike number 2 in place of, a reference to, what other,
Just strike number 2.
you just strike number 2, yeah.
Well, but we're going to give some information for use as
Yeah.
reference points for determining what the fine should be.
I make that motion.
I second that motion.
What reference?
Right?
So what is the reference? I'm not sure, I don't
To this, right?
get what you mean. What reference to what fines? I don't see one here.
Okay, that's the piece of paper the other piece of paper you have,
Okay, we're back to that one.
We're back to that
So
one.
that's talking about,
and that's saying that in Maine, the Class D crime
right,
is it carries up to 364 days in jail and a penalty of up to 2,000.
personally, I would delete it all. I would not even bring it up.
No.
It's not a crime. I don't think they have any ability to do that anyway, and
So
But
just get rid
I
of.
I just think it's confusing. I think we shouldn't get involved in saying, even the fine amount, maybe if we had another series of fines, we could say it seems to make sense between this one and this one, like, you know, $100 or
Yeah, we
something.
don't have the scale to it.
But we're not there. I don't think, I mean, maybe you guys are, but I'm not. And I would just, it's just confusing to talk about crime. Even putting the word crime is gonna be a real problem, I think. I just
The
wouldn't even
word
bring it.
crime, okay. The word crime doesn't have to be in it.
But it's there, and you said Class D crime, so I just
It's
would
in-
delete it.
It's in here for us to understand, all right, never mind, you know what? I think we should just defer this. I just don't think there's,
Or just leave the first.
I
leave
think
the
we
first
totally
part.
agree with what
delete
you've
it.
done. I
Yeah,
think it's
agree,
really
yeah.
good.
Delete
I'm just saying
violation.
delete
Yeah.
violation.
Okay, I make a motion, we accept leaving the scene of a dog attack, and as is, with the exception of removing number 2 in its entirety.
Yeah, I'll second that.
so you don't want to give the select board any information on what the potential fine would be for this in Maine, or what the fine for leaving the scene of an accident is in Massachusetts? You just want
No,
to
I
give
don't-
them no guidance on fining?
Correct.
Correct.
I think there's some valuable language in the, under Massachusetts, leaving the scene of personal injury not resulting in death. If you change this and adopt it to involve leaving the scene of a dog attack, I would strike the imprisonment part of the bottom. You know, you're leaving, it references leaving the scene without giving your name or your registration or your motor vehicle, you know, other information. And then write a fine ranging from, and then write TBD on it, to be determined. Meaning, we're not setting the fine, but we think there should be a fine. I don't think we're in the position to recommend someone goes to prison. I'm not sure.
We wouldn't be doing
I understand,
that.
that's why we would strike that, so we don't look like we're getting in over our heads, but we think there should be a fine associated.
But you don't want to say anything about what fines, you don't want to say, for instance, in Maine, the fine could be up to $2,000. In Massachusetts, there's a $500 to $1,000 fine for leaving the scene of an accident. You don't want them to know that.
I think by creating and drafting the language so that we can incorporate that into what we recommend it reading like, and then leave the fine up to who would have more knowledge about the scale of fines in town, so that, you know, you weren't getting fined more for some, more than,
Well, yeah,
you know,
okay.
so it's so way off base to the, you know, you can do something in town that's so much more
Okay.
egregious.
Okay. All right, you've convinced me. I agree with you
I think you
now,
found some good stuff.
even though I came from a different point of view before. Yes, sir, what can do you have a point?
I think there's, I assume we're discussing at this point, am I correct?
Yeah, it was, yeah, seconded.
Because there was a motion on the floor and seconded, but I'm assuming we're moving to discussion of that motion. I think there's enough information here for two people to take this information and put together what we think the recommendation should be for leaving the scene of a dog attack. And I would be much more comfortable with us sending on to the select board what we recommend for this particular inclusion in the bylaws.
Okay, so if we do it that way, it's not going in this batch. It's going into, and I'm just saying this factually, there's no axe to grind. I'm just specifying that if we do that, then we are not deciding on it tonight, and it is going to end up being an additional one of the items that we have not, that we're not turning in this timeframe.
But what would we be debating? The A, B, and C, or the fines, or whatever?
I think A, B, and C were all separate.
Can I?
We're all okay.
I want to add something just out of context, because
Then
I
I
was a
would
little
leave them.
confused about time frame as well, so I met with John Kelly to ask him where we stood with the town meeting and the warrant. He told me that the reason they had given a December deadline for the interim report was that if there was anything that we wanted to see to be reviewed by the Board of Selectmen prior to the deadline for the warrant, there was to be into that interim report in December, and I understand they gave us an extension on the interim report, but it would give the Board of Selectmen enough time to review these things over the course of a month or so, for them to provide recommendations for anything that needs to go to warrant. He told me today that at this point, it is way too late for us to be bringing forward anything to the Board of Selectmen that, with any expectation that it would be able to be on the warrant.
Okay, well, that's really critical information.
Yep, absolutely.
And in light of that, we ought to just drop this whole endeavor, I mean, postpone this whole endeavor, because the whole the whole premise, you know, that I've been operating under, based on the conversations that we had in, you know, and by that I'm talking about Mr. Runyon, you know, back a couple of months ago and so forth, is that, you know, we should do our best to try to get them something by the end of February. And now you're saying there's really no point, and if that's the case, then we're just kind of stressing ourselves for no reason, and all of this stuff can wait.
I disagree, though, and that is that what's happened by us coming around, looking at various aspects of the regulations as they exist, and making suggestions, we're making a lot of forward progress. So I think that there is a lot of value in continuing what we're doing today. If you know, going back to leaving the scene of a dog attack, I think, you know, I've heard two opinions. The one is, let's just let the town decide, because we don't know what their appetite is or how they might perceive this. And then another view that is, let's come up with something which we propose. And yet even a third, well, here's a sort of set of examples. And I'm just curious, which of these do we think we should follow on this particular issue to pursue it further?
I'm suggesting that what we should follow is to identify people on our task force who would take this information and put together what we consider to be a recommendation coming from our task force that will eventually go to the select board.
So eventually go to the select board, which means as part of the final report then?
Sure.
Right, which in another way of saying the same thing, as far as I'm concerned, is, you know, we're gonna defer this, we're not gonna do it tonight, because it's gonna go into the final report, so and tonight we have other things on the agenda, so why would we get lost in those thickets if we're not going to? The only reason we were gonna try to nail these things down tonight was so that we could send them off like tomorrow. And if there's no point in doing that, then there's no point in trying to nail this down right now.
That's what I'm saying. There's no
What are we
point in trying-
debating? Just the language in 1A, B, and C?
No. What I'm saying is there's no point in trying to come up with a definite recommendation at this point. It's obvious that there's enough discussion that two people or one person or three people should take it and bring back to us the definite recommendation that we want to send on.
The way it is.
And then we can adjust and alter that. Otherwise, what we're just doing
Yeah.
is copying what the American Kennel Club said and we're sending it on.
Which,
I don't-
Oh,
which in
based on the
some
state law.
instances can be okay.
It could be, then that's what that group, if two people did it, then they could say, this is fine, we'll take it just as it is.
I
But we
don't
can't
think,
do that
I
here
don't think
now,
two,
obviously.
I don't think two people should do that. I think that, you know,
Any group of people.
I
Puts
think
it together.
the committee should do that. I think
Way
that,
it is.
I think that, you know, it's already in good enough shape,
I think so.
because it's, after all, it's a Maine state law, and it's recommended by the American Kennel Club, that we should, when we get around to talking about it, all talk about it as it is. I don't see why two people have a better perspective on the law than any other two people.
Well, I guess my question is there something in this that somebody doesn't like? I mean, I like it the way it is. I'm okay
I like
with
it the way it is too. Yeah, is there somebody who doesn't like section 1 of this? Something about section 1 of this?
I think section 1 is fine.
Right, so I thought we were on the brink of approving section 1, but now we have to go back and take two people to look at it, and
No, whoa.
I don't understand,
I don't
really
think it's in the
understand.
form of a recommendation. I think the substance of section 1 seems very reasonable, and if we indeed want to have an addition to the bylaws, I think that would be good, but I think it needs to be put in the form of a recommendation. It's not.
And how would that be different from this?
From this.
What would it, how would that look different?
Well, it works in name.
How is it different from saying we recommend that, you adopt the main law? Because we think it seems good and it's been recommended by the American Kennel Club. We're not doing that with everything. I mean, there's lots of laws that we're getting into the weeds with and mucking around with, but this one,
There's prior,
everybody seems to like.
there's prior art for this.
Yeah, it's prior art.
And it's like, there's nothing to change about that.
Well, then if that, I feel like, what a shame it would be to shelf this, because we're so close.
Right.
So let's take a vote.
Okay.
And if everyone's might not agree on it, but if it's something that you want to bring forward and provide in the final report, we can put that and move on from it. And I think we're having that conversation right now, so
Okay.
We can always amend it later if we want to go into more details about, what the.
All right, okay,
final
so my
feasibility.
sense of things is that no one dislikes anything about section 1, and we also think that it has prior art. I see your finger, so I'll get to you in a second, and my second sense is that we're not really clear about what to recommend as a fine, and I'm not sure whether is anyone in the room who wants us to recommend a specific fine anyway or not. So I guess that's where I just have my only piece of non-clarity.
I
There's
make
a motion, just note, there's a motion on the table, so
I would
any
re-
further discussion should be about that.
Right, there was two
What
motions.
was the motion?
To accept this as a, and refer,
Okay,
refer
delete 2 then.
to, deleting number 2 and forward this to the board
Yes.
as a draft. I put the word draft in there.
So, and someone
purposely.
seconded that motion, and we vote.
The town may look at this and go,
And we
we don't
vote.
want, we think it increases our liability, so
vote.
council's advised us not to. End of story. I mean, who knows? I mean, that's up to the town.
All right,
Decide.
so you're calling the question, it sounds like, right? You want us to
We've
vote?
already asked the question, we've been talking about it, so.
just one last bit of discussion.
Sure.
When we say forward to the board, if we're gonna include it in the final report,
Right,
maybe we should vote to include it in the final report.
Yeah.
right.
And when we start making votes like that, we start putting together a final report where we have certain things that we've
Exactly.
addressed. And then we can go back, if we can write in there fines to be determined, and if by the end of this, we don't have fines, we don't feel comfortable inputting that information, we don't. But maybe we'll learn more as we go, but
I like
now
that.
we're starting to structure a report.
That's what I thought the intention was, but I
Yeah.
agree.
Like
Okay.
we're
Just-
moving it into different columns.
Okay, so with that understanding, which I don't think we need to restate the motion
Fine,
again.
that's fine.
Why don't let's vote on the motion as we now understand it, okay?
So I want to make sure I understand what we're voting on. We're voting on the part 1, striking part 2, where it says 2, right?
Yes?
And we are saying that this would be put into our final report. So at this point, we're not sending it on, as the motion says, as a draft.
Correct.
We're putting it into our final report.
Yes, we're putting it into our final report, and I just want to, however, be clear about what we mean by striking section 2. There is a blank space there for violation, right? I mean.
We can amend this.
Yes, I know, but it's just, we're not sending it off with just a 1 and no 2. We're just not putting in what 2 would be. A violation of this section is punishable by blank,
Oh, that.
right? We're leaving a placeholder for it, we're just not saying what's in there. Are we agreed to that?
Sure, you
Sure.
can, yeah, I have no problem.
Okay.
I just don't
We're
want
not
it, I
sending
don't
it
want.
on anywhere, except for our final report.
One more
Right,
time,
final
longer
One more
sending
time.
anything
one more time. Can we vote on
that.
that?
Yes.
Call for question.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. All right, awesome.
Good job, team.
The whip in a chair.
All right, man. All right, do you want to tell us about your amendment to the administrative procedure for closing public property to dogs?
Sure. So, I mulled over this for a while. Just to start off the conversation, I am a little apprehensive and a little leery of some of the language in it. You have to understand from a staff perspective,
Yep.
and a department head who works under the direction and the authority of the Board of Selectmen, I would be unable to support something like this. But, you know, I'm not a voting member of the committee. I just want you to understand that I do have some language in here that I would add, but I would prefer the Board of Selectmen to have the ability to manage the town fittingly and as needed. So if there was something that needed to be done, or a closure, temporary closure in any place in town, you know, it's somewhat of how the municipal government works. We have a board to make decisions like that for us. That being said, I think there needs to be something in there that references a temporary closure in the beginning of this.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing the past couple of days, that maybe one way around this is just to, or around the tension, you know, around the difficulty, would be to make clear that this is about long-term closures only.
That would make me feel a lot
Does that,
better.
does that?
Oh, yeah,
and
that's a good idea.
And then to just
Yeah.
define what a long-term closure is in some way that makes sense. You know, and maybe you could help on that, so that it's clear that this is not gonna impede, you know, responses to changes in circumstances, you know,
Yeah.
that's not what we're
Whether it be
talking
the
about.
Board of Health or myself
Yeah,
or the
yeah,
police
yeah.
chief or the board getting involved because something terrible happened somewhere that we need to put the brakes on it immediately and then
Right.
and give us some time to figure out what we're gonna do.
Right, we're not talking about that, we're talking about kind of changing
Got it.
land use in some kind of presumptively
Yeah,
permanent
I get
or
it.
kind of long-termy kind of way. All right, so that means a rewrite. I mean, you know, that means this has got to be approached a little differently to achieve the same thing, but, you know,
The
yeah.
intent, you know, accomplishes your goal, but it
Yes,
also leaves the
yes,
town with the
yes.
ability to function.
Okay, so I'm gonna move that, with that understanding, I'll take another pass at it, and, is it inappropriate for me to run it by you first, so we save some meeting time and just say, look, am I getting close? Or is that a, you know, 'cause it's not a quorum, it's kind of like consulting an expert to say, you know, am I, or does it just all have to go through? Either way is fine with me, I'm asking.
Sure, I mean, it's,
I'm not trying to sneak around, I'm just asking if I can, yeah.
Two points. I was gonna
Yes.
suggest, I don't see it's inappropriate. I think just it's signing a subcommittee to do anything that reports back to the board,
Okay.
and you're not a quorum.
Okay.
But secondly, and again, it was a good job. The sentiment I support.
Yeah,
I don't think it's a winner. I'm not an expert in that area, but I just think you're intruding on jurisdiction of the selectmen that A is probably inappropriate. It's just my sense. I can't argue it strenuously. And probably B is not gonna be received well anyway, which doesn't mean you can't do it.
I think.
I just,
it's
because I
more
think,
than-
because,
Oh,
just let me
okay,
go back
sorry.
through.
Go ahead.
We do have a process, and that's one of the reasons we're here. I mean, they're elected, and the ultimate, I'm failing to pick up the right word, but the ultimate approach to, or avenue to rectifying what you think is done incorrectly is to vote someone out. I mean, I'm not saying to do that, but that is how this system works, that they have to have, we give them certain powers as a community, and they have to use them, and I think we're sort of chipping away and carving a piece out, and I don't really know if we can really do that.
Let me see if I can articulate this. I
I
understand.
mean, I
and
get the
agree.
sentiment, I understand why we do it, because I disagree with how they did it, but then I acted, and whether I acted to the full extent of I had ability, I don't know, but I mean, we got up and we stood and blah, blah, blah.
I mean,
I don't know if we can actually codify this, but I
if-
might be wrong, I don't know how much time we can
If you
spend.
have,
It's a good effort, I like what you did, but.
let me try to say this. If the change in usage is going to be in perpetuity, or over some period of time, it seems that that should be in a wider review process. And is that sort of the heart of what you're driving at?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are things that require a public hearing, okay? And in a way, this is saying, there's got to be a public hearing before you do that.
No, I can't say you're totally wrong. I don't know for sure, yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, a wise board might decide to chip away at its own power for the sake of, creating rapport and unity in, between itself and the community and all of that. We want to hang on to as much power as possible is not always a healthy impulse. And I also think it's important for us to just go on record. If it is our collective sentiment or, strong majority sentiment that this would be better, I don't think we should say, well, we're not going to say it because they're not going to agree with this. So, I don't know, but. So, but I do think it clearly needs, I had kind of come to that on my own a couple of days ago. I was thinking the real issue here is that what I'm hearing you say is you want to be able to respond, and I don't want to take that away from you. What I don't want is for decisions that have, because they're so long-term, have impacts on, like for instance, I think this decision on Wildflower has some impact on whether young families will want to live here or not. Okay, so I think if that wasn't part of the decision-making conversation, that's a flaw, and I want to fix that, whether you agree with me or not. That's where I'm coming from. So I think the distinction between short and long-term could help us to parse those in a good way. Yeah.
I agree with David that having a subgroup, be it 2 or 3 people, or how many, is appropriate way of moving forward with writing that becomes more precise by that group that's then brought back to us for consideration. I think that really helps a great deal in terms of us knowing exactly what we're doing. Could you say a little bit about what motivated this particular inclusion here of this item of administrative procedure for closing?
Yeah, well, I think the Wildflower closure, as I just said, actually didn't take into consideration a lot of things that ought to have been part of that. In for instance, how if you take away places for people to let their dogs run, does that affect the desire of young families with dogs to come and live here? Does it affect, the rental market, in the sense that if some of the comments we got on the Facebook page were, if I can't, my dog is a member of the family, they go where I go. If the dog can't run, then I'm not gonna vacation in Orleans. Those are 2. There are more, but not to drag the conversation out. To me, the healthy way to have looked at that would have been, okay, we have a problem, and then we should be looking at different ways of addressing the problem, and we should also be looking at what are the kind of unintended ripple consequences that we might encounter if we solve it this way versus that way versus the other way, and what are community resources like ODOG, for example, that might rise up in the context of this decision and say, hey, we can help, we'll do this, that, and the other thing, and so forth. So, I want to make sure that in decisions like these that people who are affected and interested and maybe have perceptions and understandings of what unintended consequences what might be and what alternatives might be and so forth, get a chance to air that all out before someone just kind of says, oh, okay, let's close it, boom, without thinking it through, and then we have to deal with it after the fact like we're doing now, which I think is not good for the community. I think it's, yeah.
I mentioned this at the last meeting too. So at the present time, you don't think there's a way to be able to do what you just said?
There's no requirement at all that anything like that be done. I mean,
Doesn't the open meeting law require some of that?
all that the open meeting law requires is that there be a deliberation, and I would say, if you play the tape of the wildflower closure and the tape of the wildflower reconsideration, I don't see a deliberation there. I don't see any exchange of thought and, what if we did this, and is this a good idea? I mean, like here, in the past half hour, we've been deliberating. You won't see anything like that, in my opinion, there. So I don't think the spirit of the open meeting law was actually followed. And then, even if you had a public hearing, which is a separate level, you're only required to give notice. You don't solicit written comments. You don't have to have a decision where you say, well, we looked at this comment and this is what we thought about it and this is why we did it this way instead of that way. And in things that have a real impact on the character of the town, and I think this does way more than people realize, I think it's important to go through that process. And no, I think the requirements are very slack.
Mayor?
Yeah, please.
Thank you.
Once again, I would recommend a vote from the committee, and just to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible. If there's the support of the committee to pursue this further, to polish this, to add some type of language likely that we bring forward that would include some type of temporary closure language, is that something that we would be comfortable moving forward, submitting as a recommendation, or is it something that we want to discard at this point? I think we should take a vote just to either pursue this and put further work into it, or not support it and shelf it.
Refine or discard, you're
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna move that, that this be refined and that the lead, that I take the point on that and that I do it in consultation with you, Nate, and that when something that is more workable emerges, that we will then it will then get run through the committee again. That's my motion.
I second that motion.
Does anyone want to discuss that motion?
I don't want to put Nate in a position of difficulty with the select board. If that can be done without doing that, I think it would be fine.
Yeah, okay. Nate, you'll
Maybe
let me know.
he's not the
if-
best one to do this, I don't know.
right?
Like I said, I don't mind providing input to lessen the implication that we're undermining the Board of Selectmen's authority, but I would not be in a position to support this, working under them. Because I support their authority in governing the town and the way the government is set up at this time. So I can help,
Yeah.
and you guys are the ones that are voting, so.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
fair.
So, any other discussion on the motion? All in favor
Of
of
A redraft.
Refining?
A redraft.
Refining.
refining and recycling through the committee?
Yep.
All opposed? Okay, the motion's passed.
So is that, were you abstaining or did you
I'm
vote?
abstaining.
Okay, so,
All right.
sorry, did you vote for it?
So the last one of these items is the elimination of fees for, license fees for service dogs. Now, we may have already even, have
Passed
we already
that.
approved this?
We approved that.
We approved it already, okay.
Yep.
All right, so that takes us out of this section of the agenda. And,
I think that one is really a sensitive one, that we made a good decision on that.
I agree. That was your idea, wasn't it?
What,
It was Ed's, or
I was looking at Ed, wasn't it your
what
idea?
idea?
I think it was Jessica's.
Oh, it might have been Jessica's, yeah, okay. All right, so that takes care of that. So 5 is moot, 6 is moot, so that brings us to 7. So, Bayside Beaches access discussion, and we want to leave, let's look at where we are. 22. And we want to give our, let's do this.
Set an
What do you-
alarm.
How about if we did this till 7, and then we came back to control at 7? Would that be
That's fine.
workable?
Time boxing is great. I'm in favor of time boxing.
Okay, so, I want to be the kind of timekeeper on this, and maybe let us know when it's 5 minutes to 7?
Yep, I'll count this down.
Great, okay, so, how would we, how are we gonna kick this baby off? Why don't I just mention what we have as, we have 2 exhibits that are not with us, right? We have pictures that were taken, by myself and other ODOG members on a schedule of 10:30 to 2:30, although that wasn't rigid, and a lot of the pictures that we took did have timestamps, although a lot of them did not, or some of them did not. And then we have pictures that Paul Pekaski sent by email. And I think some of those were 11:30 pictures, and then 11:30 and later. And there were several days there with 11:30 with a reasonable crowd already assembled at that time. And I think all the afternoon pictures tended to show that there were, if it was a nice day, there were people there. You know, in the dozens, let's say. And the 10:30-ish pictures were more sparse, although not empty. So that's, yes, go ahead.
Oh,
I-
sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, so I don't know exactly what the point, I'm guessing what the point is. I'm guessing that you want to extend hours or whatever, extended hours. The dog owners are looking for more hours, but being the person that goes to that beach every day, I can say that it's tidal based. So like, I go down, I literally live by like the tides, so, you know, over a span of a week, every day it moves forward an hour or whatever when people tend down, but then you also have people that go there for the specific reason of there not being water, and the kids like to play in the pool, like the little pools and stuff, so, you know, like I applaud the effort of like the pictures and all that stuff, but it's like a moving target, and every day is different down there, is all I just wanted to say.
Okay.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, in addition to, I didn't know what the point of the pictures was, or is, in either case. What are the pictures to?
I think the
to-
point of the pictures was to try to, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong about this, or if your experience is different. My experience is that when we leave at 9, there's usually no one there but us. So that somewhere between 9 and sometime later, it appears 11:30 is, you know, people are there in reasonably significant numbers. There's a transition. And so we were just trying to establish, is 9 a reasonable time? You know, or that's really what the point of the pictures, from our point of view, was. And, you know, clearly the afternoon, you know, no question, and seemingly the late morning. If it were, you know, I can make an argument for 10 o'clock.
But just to
At some
clarify-
point I will, but that's, you know, anyway.
But the clarification is that people without dogs are at the beach? Is that the question? Okay. And so then, what is the point of that?
Can I ask you why you're asking me that question? Because
Because I'm trying to frame the question, because it's a big question. I'm trying to frame.
Pictures were like presented and
what-
without any context.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the context, I'm not challenging you yes or no, I'm
it's
just trying to
data.
understand
It's
precisely.
data, okay?
Okay.
I mean, I think, you know, we can all make of it whatever we, you know, and when you kind of say, I'm not sure I want to ascribe a point, because
Oh,
I
okay.
think all of us
Right.
can just take that as this is factual information, and then, you know, now we all know what they reveal for whatever that's worth, and we can then interpret and argue and advocate or whatever, you know, with that little bit of extra knowledge in our data banks.
Okay, so it's somewhat contextual of some sort. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't some specific point. So for this question,
What question?
Yeah,
You mean
that's
the
what I'm saying.
Bayside
We have a-
beaches?
we have a-
This is Nate's gonna talk about.
Is you gonna talk about it? Okay, so is that what we're doing?
I think.
I think we're trying to do a little bit of what some of us feel wasn't done originally, which is to kind of look at some of the various aspects of the question. And out of that, maybe there's some kind of recommendation that could emerge, which could consist of, that, we think the majority thinks the time should be this instead of that, or the dates should be that instead of that, because there's also the matter of the dates, right? The dates are, right now, I think, are May 1 to September 15th. And, my experience after Labor Day is that it was just, there was nobody there.
Just to clarify, that date's not familiar to me. The dates for Wildflower or Skakit Beach?
Wildflower.
Wildflower, June 15th to Labor Day.
Oh, June 15th, no.
Yeah.
But Skakit also
That's-
changed, right? Skakit didn't used to be May 1st.
I'm sorry, I'm,
This was a product of the second public hearing where you brought it in with the selectmen and they crafted the language for 70 Willie Atwood, Wildflower Lane, June 15th to Labor Day.
June 15th.
No dogs
to
from
Labor
9
Day.
a.m. to 5 p.m.
Okay, all
You
right,
read-
I stand corrected. I'm not gonna bother, say anything other than that about that.
So could I ask a question just so I understand that?
Sure.
On the map here, I apologize, it's still
Oh,
unclear.
I brought some other maps.
Can
too.
you-
This might-
yeah,
Fifty-one.
yeah,
Where's
Yeah,
that?
I actually wanna write in who's what, cause it's always been rather murky to me.
Thanks.
And then that way, some of my questions will be
Dave, well,
maybe
we put-
eliminated.
Do
I
you
wanna
know
ask
that
them.
we park at 17?
Yeah.
Is that clear to you?
That I know, yeah, I
Oh,
know
yeah,
where we
exactly.
are, I don't know who the ownerships are and who has control. This might be helpful.
Sit down.
All right, so I'm not sure, are you gonna, do you have things you wanna tell us about this? Should we just let you?
Well, I think it's important to understand the ownership of, in context of the layout of the beach. So, when I reference June 15th to Labor Day, no dogs are allowed on the beach from 9 to 5. Outside of that time period, the dogs need to be 300 feet from Skakit Beach's protected area, and within the area, the dogs must be leashed with a lead no greater than 30 feet within 300 feet of the high tide mark. That was the language we came up with, so if you're gonna run them, you need to get offshore 300 feet from the high tide mark. But that is only specific to that town piece right there.
Which
Only
town
to
piece?
70.
Yeah, I'll have to grab that map.
This one?
Yeah, the one that says,
Confused, 'cause
Town.
it's-
the
Town.
the
That
one
says
to the
town,
left,
town,
so the
town.
Wildflower
Between
This is
the
Beach.
like
condos in the
actual
state.
Skakit
Right.
Beach,
Right,
That's
right.
And this is like what I call it, the private side of Skakit Beach.
Well, there's
Why
that,
is-
this is where the cars were going down, right here.
Oh, that's not that's the condos.
That was the
Okay.
condos, yeah.
Okay, and Farquhar's property is there, okay.
And now there's, for the state property and the Farquhar property, which was previously the Elemium property, there's a conservation restriction, which says basically you can only use that section of beach for walking.
Right.
It can't be used as a beach, you can't set up chairs, lay
Right.
down towels.
Right.
But there is no reference to dogs.
So the sign that's there, doesn't it does reference dogs, no? At Farquhar's property?
Yeah, are you talking about this one?
Not far from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there is this sign.
Okay, from,
Does that reference animals
Who
or
put
no?
that up? No.
Well, at the bottom, it says Massachusetts Sea Path, and it says supervised by the town of Orleans and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Can you read it? Sorry.
Sure. Notice, the landowners have granted permission to the general public to walk between mean high and low tides between sunrise and sunset. Picnicking, sunbathing, and pet walking strictly prohibited at all times.
Okay.
So, yeah, so, by the way, I just, what I wanna, I guess I gotta throw this in here. one of the things that makes this all really messy, in my opinion, is that if we're gonna really enforce, then, you know, the only thing that's supposed to happen there is that people are supposed to be strolling. So you've got the town intervening against one non-sanctioned use in favor of another's non-sanctioned use. And basically, if, you know, it's like, if we were gonna be really, really strict, all those chairs have gotta go, nobody's,
So I think that's to the left of the sign. To the right of the sign, that doesn't apply. To the left of the sign, and they do actually enforce it. The officers will come and they actually make people move. It depends on the day, but sometimes they enforce it, sometimes they have a talking with the people.
okay, cause there's that little, if you see this little curly thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Nate, I'll give it back to you in a second, but if you see on this map, there's this little curly thing here, and on this map, it's right after Farquhar where it goes on to, well, that's funny, these are a little different.
To first,
I'm sorry.
So the conservation restriction for the first property
okay.
identifies specifically the right to walk or exercise dogs or other pets.
And which
Which
property is that
property is
now?
that?
First property,
left
the
of
one
Farquhar.
closest in the Amskake
Oh,
Street.
FURST.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
no
good.
problem.
All right, good enough.
All right,
That is referenced in the conservation.
all right,
You
say,
can walk.
say
Yeah.
again what it is, you can walk
But
dogs?
that's where.
Can't
that's where
walk
people-
dogs.
Oh, you
Can't.
can't?
You are not allowed to
Oh,
walk
I
dogs.
thought you said can.
Yeah, I
Okay.
thought you did too. Okay.
And while we're over there,
There are
though,
two
you
properties
could
that-
walk a dog on a
That's
leash
where everyone's going.
to
Oh.
the,
My question.
to down below, right? Because that's conservation.
So outside of that
Is there any way to get here?
property line that with the map I gave you, the conservation restriction would not be in place. So
Yeah.
anything outside of the first property,
Right.
you could.
So you would just have to get there
Right.
from a different angle, right?
Sure.
And do you know how to do that?
No, sir. Not necessarily without, I haven't investigated private property rights in a public access and anything like that.
No, I mean, because really, this is one of the things, I don't know, I'm not sure why you're laughing. Maybe I should just not assume. Why are you chuckling there?
I was chuckling because if in fact you can get to that, if that's accessible to dogs, you have the right of passage. So
Right.
this is in conflict.
Yeah, so I think that, my guess is that there is a way here, and that one of the things that, and this is where I talk about unintended consequences, one of the things that may all happen now if we bottle up, Willie Atwood, 70 Willie Atwood Wildflower, if we bottle that up, is that people like myself are gonna figure out how to get over to this part, and we're gonna park our cars down here on someplace, and then probably the selectmen are gonna hear hear about that, and then there's gonna, we're gonna be here again, because somebody else is gonna be unhappy, but, anyway, so thanks for clarifying, so that's okay, so first is no dog walking, thank you, and then what about, how do you say that, next one?
Farquhar,
Farquhar, what's the deal there? I know he walks his dog.
Farquhar
but it's his private property.
and the state property can be considered one and the same
Okay,
based on, it was the previous Elemium property, which
Okay.
had a conservation restriction in it.
mm-hmm,
And granted, I'm not a lawyer, but I have the conservation restriction, which references that this has been set aside for the public to be able to walk, for the CPATH. There is no reference to dogs in the CR, but I believe there's an OMU with the state.
could you define your, initialisms, please?
Mode of understanding or some type of, Bob, OMU? You know what OMU stands for?
And MOU is Memo of Understanding.
MOU?
MOU.
MOU,
Modus
thank you.
operandi.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have that information. This seems the state is placing signs on that property referencing that they're not allowing dogs. So I would assume there is, but we want to dig that up to clarify that the state's operating under. But if it is state property,
Is that a real sign, Carl? Is that a DCR sign? 'Cause I didn't see on that.
Would you like to see
Yeah,
it,
I
or?
would like to see it.
Could you pause for a second? You guys keep jumping around, so
No.
just stop for a second. That sign is where?
At the end of the path,
At
Which
the,
path?
the really outward path.
Going on to 64 Williat with the, it's at the end of Williat
Williat
Road,
Path, yeah.
basically.
Just see,
So where the lane goes across and turns left and right and people used to park, at the end of it.
The parking is to
you don't know
the
what sea
right.
path is?
Well, that's the,
Of the
that's the,
path.
No.
that's
See it.
why we have
It's
these
just
conservation
show me.
restrictions. A lot of people
This is
walk.
where
Path
we
is
used to
right
park
here.
our cars.
So here's
right
the
here.
sign,
The
right
sign's
on the edge
right
of
here.
Farquhar's property.
The sign's
So when I
right
said
there.
left, like,
Right.
we sit here,
But
and
my
we
next
don't go
one,
left, because we know we can't go left, because that's what
Right.
the sign says.
Right.
And some people go left, and then they get spoken
But
to,
there's no way to get there from here at this point. You have to walk on the beach.
unless you live on the, that's a
Unless you live
private
there.
road.
Correct.
Yeah, so, yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
Okay.
You're
It's a
not supposed to
DCR
park
on
on
it,
the-
so-
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
So I think it could
So
be.
that's fine.
If it's a DCR on it, then I'd believe it. But I don't see it's a DC, because the other signs on, in those properties, there are DCR signs, and they are clearly labeled as DCR signs.
Yeah, I just think Mass Path or whatever that is,
Yep.
at one point that was a thing. And I don't know if it's a thing anymore.
Well, there's been a significant amount of erosion. At one point, where you park at the town property, to the west, there was actually like decking up on the dune there to start. Then welcome to the Bruce, the Massachusetts Sea Path,
Ah,
Namskakett Sea Path.
It was the wooden path?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and it just got ruined one winter.
But that's why these conservation restrictions were put in place to allow the passage of people to continue through, for perpetuity, to allow people to walk along these private properties and incorporate a walk all the way that goes all the way to Brewster.
It would be helpful to understand what that sign really means.
It might be something that we wanna, I certainly can do some further homework on this.
Well, could it, again, clarification of the sign, that sign is for the beach, is it above the mean high water line, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so which is a very narrow area, relatively speaking.
But I don't have access to the deed for the state property to see if there's a king's deed there, whether they own out on intertidal. If they don't, then clearly there's a colonial ordinance that you can fish, follow, or navigate along the intertidal and not be subject to that property ownership.
Correct. So then I go back to the place that's labeled town, because to access that is typically gonna be where everybody goes, is that lane, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you go to town, and that's where the Board of Selectmen have jurisdiction,
Correct.
yes.
right? And that's it, right?
And in
Or-
that
Okay,
little section
just-
of
just put it-
town.
let me
Yeah,
finish.
go
I
ahead,
don't wanna go-
sorry.
So that's all they can have jurisdiction for. The state to the left, do they have jurisdiction on that, the town?
Well, this town like administers it, right? Like, isn't there some kind of
I
joint?
don't know.
I mean, in other words, the police
For
can
enforcement.
enforce, yeah. The police, they don't, so the town doesn't set the rule, but whatever the rule is.
Exactly, so if there's a rule by the state,
Yeah.
which doesn't preclude dogs, I'm asking,
But I think it does.
Then-
I think it does. I mean,
where does it say that?
well, it might depend on whether this is a DCR park. Is it a DCR park?
I think that's something that we should be investigating.
Because if it's a DCR park, then as a coastal beach, then you wouldn't be able to have dog fun. That's in the rules for DCR parks, sadly.
So is Sneakus a DCR park, is that what you're saying?
That's a town beach.
But is that a DCR park?
No,
So.
no, DCR is
So,
state.
so there aren't dogs allowed on Skakit Beach, correct?
Right,
But
so
what-
I'm just trying to narrow it down, because the town does have jurisdiction, the Board of
So what's the
Selectmen.
difference between this piece and that piece
Yeah.
of town? That's what I don't understand.
Between Skaket and Wildflower?
Does the
Yes.
town own that, or is that
Well,
an
the-
easement?
They're two town beaches, look at it that way.
So,
It is.
so no dogs
Okay.
allowed at one beach, but a couple feet down, there are dogs allowed or not?
Well, now there aren't. I mean, there always have been. Through, 1930, you could, we probably didn't own it back then, right? This was given to us by the Community of Jesus, am I right?
I wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, we didn't,
Calm
yeah,
down
this,
now.
we've only owned this since, the Community of Jesus sold it to us as part of something.
So you understand
Private.
where we're parking, which I call the Gavigan property, which is the lifeguard housing, which is the town little square that's connected to Wildflower Lane with the
Right.
2 buildings on it that's inland. We have to cross private property, the Buckley property, to get to that section of beach, which we have an easement with Buckley that allows us to cross.
Right. And does Buckley grant the town authority to
Easement.
have jurisdiction of that property?
Just allows
Or
an
is it
easement for us
just, it's just an
to
easement?
pass over.
So there's no regulation, or unless the Buckleys have a prohibition to walking over that with a dog?
No, sir,
Because as far as we know, there's nothing.
as far as I
So
know.
then the point is at the very end, the actual access to the beach.
And that town land, as you walk over the Buckley property to that town land does permit dogs to be walked?
Presently, and this was the conflict that was, was brought up,
Okay.
one of the catalysts why we're sitting here today.
Let me ask you another thing. Do we, I don't want to speak for Mr. Farquhar. But my recollection of my conversation with him was that he was not in favor of enforcing dog restrictions. And I spoke to him probably about 2 months ago or something, as he was walking his dog on Willie Atwood, as I was driving down the road to just understand the lay of the land down there. And my recollection, of the conversation was that he was not in favor of these new restrictions. And it just made me wonder, like, are these private rights, or, is it could either one of these people, Farquhar first, just say, no, we don't, yes, technically we have the right to preclude dogs. We didn't give that right away. But we don't mind, we don't see a problem, or is that foreclosed? Are they part of the equation personally or not at this stage?
I think that's a question for town council.
The-
I'd be speaking outside of my
If there's,
comfort with that.
But
if there are conservation restrictions on those properties,
Right.
then the rules that are set up for those properties, based on who's administering them, DCR, apply to the town.
All right.
But doesn't this boil down to, and maybe I'm wrong, but Farquhar, who he indicated to my wife that he didn't care about the dogs. He was actually against the restrictions, but that I don't think it's neither here nor there. The real issue is access to the beach, right?
Oh, no, we have perfect access. Well, we have an easement.
No, but I mean allowing us to have access to the beach. If I want to walk my dog there, the town is saying you can't go there.
Well, you can go to our section of the beach, down the end of the causeway through the Buckley property onto the town.
Not during the hours and days that
Right.
it's restricted.
Oh, correct, yeah.
Right,
correct.
that's what I'm saying. So that's what that boiled. I'm just trying to make sure I understand it. So
Yep.
that's where the point of access is.
Yes.
Other people, private, have access. Maybe they can get in, but we can't. Right? The rest of the town really doesn't have access.
There is Willie Atwood, which is not through the Buckley property, but there is a right-of-way on the maps between Willie Atwood and did you call it the Gavin, the town property, the houses?
Sure, yeah. The Gavigan
The
property.
Gavigan property. That shows up on the maps, and there's that really thick line between the state and Farquhar is actually an easement that you can walk down. And in fact, there's even a, Orleans dog station there with bags for you, so.
Yeah, that's the other confusing thing, what you just said, the Orleans dog station there, what is that doing there?
I
Well,
think that's
that's
one of the
certainly
ones
not-
I
Patty's
fill.
fault.
I fill that one, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, just to clarify, that easement exists and is not a a restriction to actually walking across it, so the public has access to that as well.
You-
So there's two
it's-
points of access.
Right, there's the
So
state,
there's boils down to that the town has a restriction on the actual having dogs on the beach during certain hours and days.
and that applies to both
Right.
state and town?
That applies specifically to town.
Because
Okay.
the state
Right.
has its own restriction that's already in
Right.
effect, and that doesn't require
And
the
it-
town to.
So if the town changes its policy and says people can take their dogs out there, they can, subject to whatever else might be along the beach to the west. That's not our problem, right?
Well, no, that's not necessarily true.
Okay.
The town is responsible for enforcement of the CPAth and the conservation restriction that goes along with the state and the Farquhar property.
Okay. And is the restriction to above the mean high water line? And the reason I ask is that the beach itself is really very little used for dogs. It's, in my view, and this is my personal view, that the primary use of that is out on the flats the dogs can run.
So the conservation restriction that the town's responsible for enforcing is from elevation 10 to mean high water. But,
And elevation 10 is 10 feet above.
right,
Okay, yeah.
if this is, regardless of ownership, if the state doesn't have a deed showing that they own the intertitle, it goes to Commonwealth. And if the state of Massachusetts doesn't allow DCR doesn't allow dogs on their beaches,
Mhm.
that's just my guess, that would carry over into the intertitle.
In a line where the line goes.
Right, yeah,
So,
Straight
so
out.
we'd have to just go out in a straight line, right? I mean, we
Yeah,
could, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and it could be town policy. It's conceivable. A town with our geography could decide in its wisdom that, you know, we don't like the idea of dogs not being able to run in the summer because we think that's not very nice to the dogs. And, so we're gonna make it very clear to people that they can go straight out at low tide in this particular zone, and if they stray, they do so at their legal risk. But, you know, one of the, I guess what I wanna say about that is that, that could be tried in conjunction with a program of very clear and, energetic communication of expectations. I mean, one of the things that I find is really missing in all of this is that there's a lot of upset in various different contexts about things that have never, that there's no advanced communication about. Like the first time I went, not to get to digress, but just to, so you know what I mean. The first time I went to Kent, somebody said to me, "This is a place for dogs to be dogs, you know, anything goes," you know, very confidently. This is a guy from Brewster who explained it to me that way. Well, since then, you know, I have heard a lot of other perspectives, and I understand that place in a much more complex way. And it just, to me, is illustrative of that when you drive up there, nobody's telling you what's right and what, you know, nobody telling you anything, and then they're just getting mad because things aren't playing out the way they would like it to. I think we can do better than that. So I'm just wondering whether there might not be a potential for some way to make it really clear that the people who are sitting where they have a right to sit are not to be molested, but that at least residents, you know, might have an opportunity to do that. It's just a thought. I know you can't.
So, let me just summarize. I have a couple, this has been a very interesting discussion, and we're getting close to our 5-minute mark.
9 minutes left.
So, I basically heard in this tapestry of properties, there are some outstanding questions about how far and when you can go out on the flats. And in particular, administration of the state and other parcels along this way, whether they're under DCR or not. That sign, if the CPAth sign is that, you know, to understand truly what's going on with the property, we need to understand why those signs are there and what the CPAth sign is. Because I don't think anybody, I've walked that beach and I've read those signs and I saw the DCR sign and I saw that one and I scratched my head because I didn't know what it meant. I don't have the history here. So I think that those are some of the things that we've talked about, and the thing which we haven't started to address really is, because we don't have all of the information about these properties, whether or not we're going to change access times as they are currently set up, or am I missing something?
Well, the only little kind of nitpick I would add to that is that we can't change anything.
Right.
You know, but, yeah, I don't have any disagreement with that, does, Bob, do you?
Would it be helpful if someone checked out to see who put that sign up there, the one that you have in front of you?
Undoubtedly, just so you know, though, I mean, my research indicates that, assuming that the other question we should ask is whether the state parcel there is a state park, the one right here, because if it is, then, you know, as a coastal beach, there's gonna be no dogs there.
Does that mean on flats in front of that property?
At that, I don't know. You know, it says no swimming area, so when you have no water, do you have a swimming area? I guess I would say no. So that's a good, yeah, there's a
Well,
lot of
swimming areas
technicality.
usually defined as bathing beaches for a reason to keep the water clean, and they don't want the waste in the water.
So are you suggesting there's no need to
No.
investigate that sign?
No, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying, I have a feeling that it might be moot, but there's no reason not to ask the question anyway. So-
Could I try to frame it a little bit and tell me if the group disagrees, because we're never gonna get this done.
Yeah.
State or no state, it doesn't, I haven't seen evidence that the state's even aware or involved in this at this point, because they weren't before. Dogs are running everywhere. So put that aside for the moment. It seems to me this is a public use policy, if that's the right phrase, that the town made a decision on how to use that area, public area. And it's a debate about how is that public area gonna be used and to what extent. And my personal view frames it that it seems that there are beaches, every other beach is non-dog during the summer, which I think is appropriate. I don't have disagreement with that. I think personally, this is a unique spot and allows access to a very unique area, which is basically low tide, the flats, and allows dogs in a very low impact manner to be able to run around, and I think it's a benefit to the town overall. There's some people who don't like it, and my answer is, it's not personal.
No, it's
Is not to say too bad, but we understand, but you've got all the other beaches. You know, no one can go to that beach. I totally agree. I don't think Skakit should have dogs over there, and if anybody does, they should be punished. And I would think we should think about on the beach, maybe it's used as an access point to get to below high tide line. I don't know. I mean, I think it would be tweaked that way, but I know all summer long, it was an adverse impact on a lot of people when you just couldn't go there at 6 o'clock.
Right.
And if you get down there, there's nobody in the beach, or if there are, that's the game. This is where dogs go. If you want to go sit on the beach with the gnats and the mosquitoes, then there's going to be some dogs coming by.
But can you go
And-
to Kent's Point at any time during the day?
Yeah.
And that
yeah.
has water?
It's all
It's
sunlight.
different
It's a
water.
completely different environment, but it's sunlight to dusk. Yeah, you know, sunrise.
So there is a place to take your dog all the time, 24/7 in Orleans, year round, and then just the beaches.
But
There
it-
is.
Honestly, if we look at Kent's Point as a resource for
It also
dogs,
is completely overwhelmed with, I mean, not completely, it is highly concentrated because, and you could see it happening at all the town landings. People started complaining who lived by town landings because you had these number of people who then concentrated their use
I
of
just
it.
want to throw one
I
thing in
didn't finish
here
my
that-
sentence.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And we have got a couple of minutes left.
We're done.
So our ability to, well, never mind. I think that, what I really want to say is that following the tides to have access to a tidal flat is something that is important for dog owners. And for that reason, the timing
Yeah.
restriction makes it difficult.
Yeah.
And that's the
To
primary
make it
point I want.
tidal-based would be a whole other way to approach it.
I'm not
I-
saying it
I
should
agree.
be.
And
I'm not
keep-
saying it should be. It might not be manageable.
Though,
Oh.
okay?
It's nice lateral thinking.
I'm saying, let's it should be seriously considered that the way this works is, the dogs are not on the beach at all. The dogs are on the flats only. They get there by going straight vertically out from, what we call Wildflower, okay? They go straight vertically out, and they go out and play.
So they don't go right, they don't go left, they're just out.
No, they could even, I
Well,
I
once they're
think,
out.
well,
Once
I
they're
think if they go left, who cares really? Like, what's the harm? You know, like, why bother?
Once they're out, I mean.
Once they're out.
Right.
They go way out, they go left, they stay away from the nesting birds and all that, because we understand that. And we take that seriously, and we'll educate everybody and so forth. And then whatever time of day that is, that's what we'll do. And once the tide starts to come in, we're gone. You know, like, that to me makes more sense. It's not as administratively easy to express, but it makes more sense.
We're down
Just
to
something
our
to think about.
last minute, so
Okay, and
we'll
the
wrap
other,
up.
so I just want to note too, that we haven't touched Skake It and dates at Skake It. And maybe that's for another evening, or maybe we can vote after we talk about control to maybe circle back to Skake It for 10 minutes or something if we want to. But, the dates on Skake It, I think, it's creeping up on us, it's getting close, and it's worth talking about, in my opinion. But let's honor our 7 o'clock thing. And so let's talk about control.
Right. So in our, it's a summary for those that weren't here. Last meeting, we started to talk about control, and Carl had put some things together that we looked at, and the chief was talking about the issues that he had with the current ordinance and his inability to enforce it. And Bob and I just took the action item to basically go do a little bit of lateral thinking to see what we could come up with. Initially, I looked at it as like an exclusion, like, dogs are on leashes except for, in a long list. And then Bob and I went back and forth a little bit, and we got to the point where we have what we presented here and would like to go over with you today. So, and so basically, as a primer, Orleans is a dog-friendly community. The ongoing compatibility between dogs and human beings is anchored in a long-established expectations that pet owners and other citizens are responsible and considerate. Hence, dog owners strive to ensure that the canine's conduct respects the quality of life we enjoy in our town. In Orleans, the joy owner celebrates with their dog is in concert with their rights and responsibilities shared by all members of that community. And we're just trying to set the tone and tenor.
Let me say that we thought it was important to do that because we wanted to be able to suggest this recommendation that would, we hope, eventually go into the final report with a positive thrust to it, instead of a controlling negative tone to it. And this opening sentence essentially says that Orleans is a dog-friendly community, and that dog owners as well as citizens are responsible and considerate of that. So that's the general tone to that. Then we move to dividing the issue of control into two locations. Ned's going to talk about the town center, and I'm going to talk about the conservation land and town parks.
Right. So all dogs will be leashed while being walked on sidewalks and street in Orleans Town Center. The dog will be kept close to the walker, no more than 5 to 7 feet away. While unleashed, the dog is expected to be under control. This means the leashed dog will not lunge at people or dogs or show combativeness, persistent growling or excessive barking, and that may be perceived as menacing or dangerous by others who share the town center environment. I think while there's support for dogs on leashes through DCR and the length of the leashes, this seems to be, if we keep the intent in mind as opposed to the words, because I think as an ordinance, it might end up being somewhat different. We would need to use different language. But we think that that's something which would benefit through some clarity.
And just clarification, town center, is that, I've seen some zoning maps, they have like an oval up to Snows down to like Snow Library. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. I think that needs some definition, because I would assume
But
that
that's-
would include like shopping malls and, TJ Maxx, Shaw's, there's a bunch of different areas where people are congregating. And I think this approach is, I think we can define that better, so.
I think the spirit of that is that, although there's no indication there's a problem with downtown walking of dogs, the spirit of it is that if a dog is on a leash, we want to make sure that it's clear that they're under control while they're on a leash.
No, I like it. I mean, I'm almost afraid I'm gonna hit somebody's dog
And I
if they're
think,
having a
I
leash,
think I
you
would
know?
agree with Ed that we can define where town centers are.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's difficult.
And it might be, just for clarity, because it gets confusing when you try to do, it might be you do something, there is a zone, I forget what I saw, one of these is a zoning thing.
Yeah, I
But
saw that
maybe
as well.
Nate has some access to something that gives you a definition that you might forget about Stop and Shop for now, for example, just set that in place and then maybe expand it later if it seems appropriate, but just for implementation, you know?
Just as a little suggestion, while we're talking, if ideas are coming up to you, like that's excellent. Because we like to sort of get collect people's feedback and come back and try to come up with a tighter revision. How's that?
Of what?
Um,
Of the meaning of town centers.
Yes, and
Yeah, I think that comment's helpful, David, because maybe it could be plural instead of singular.
Or not,
What
you know,
could
it might
be
be too
plural?
complicated, you know, you
Yeah.
might just, I'm a big believer in baby steps, but you guys did a great job, so whatever you wanna do is just a thought to keep
We
it
can
simple,
work on
you
that.
know?
I'm sorry, what could be plural?
Centers. instead
Well,
of
you could
town
have like
centers.
Shaw's Market, you could have Stop and Shop, they're far away from each other, whereas the town center is rather close.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a logical contiguous area. So I'm just thinking of implementation, but I don't care if you
I
call
think
it
it's
simple.
it's simplified, it seems to me, by saying town center.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of, I guess, over where you live, where there's sort of a center in East Orleans there, where the post office is and that.
Yeah.
So I think, when Ed and I discussed all this, one of the conclusions we came to, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, Ed, is that you really can't state a regulation that takes into consideration every possible scenario.
Correct.
And if you try to, you become so restrictive that it becomes counter to the nature, the spirit of trying to have something be positive for the town. So the issue at hand is, how can we get language that is constructive and clear enough that people will understand it, so that if there is a problem, it can be solved through reasonable people talking about the solution to that problem, as Chief McDonald said when he was here. I think we've accomplished that. If I may go on to this next part, which is town conservation lands and town parks, to just go through it together. All dogs shall be restrained or under control of a responsible person at all times, sufficiently to ensure the dog conduct does not threaten or present a real risk of harm to human beings or other dogs. This means an owner is accountable for making sure their dog does not bite, scratch, or jump upon human beings or other dogs. Owners are expected to properly control dog conduct so that harming wildlife and damaging environment are avoided. That's very similar to information that we've discussed previously, and it's also very similar to what exists now in the present, okay? It goes on to say, a dog behaving positively to voice commands and hand signals comes when called and remains sitting or standing beside the owner. While walking, the owner is expected to keep their dog in clear view, so if it becomes necessary, they can immediately take action to correct inappropriate dog conduct. A dog under control approaches people and other dogs in the area in an agreeable manner that encourages comfort rather than promotes distress. This means the owner stops their dog from running up in an aggressive way that alarms or assaults others. Unless invited, the owner does not let their dog approach others who wish to elude such conduct.
My only comment, I thought it was very well written. And again, I don't own a dog, but the part about keeping their dog in clear view, to me, it needs like also a reasonable length. So like you might be able to, well, like
you can see.
like you can see the dog, but you're useless if you are not right there to stop it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
You got your binoculars out?
yeah. So you know what I mean? Like, I would just think it logical to not only have the clear view, but within a reasonable length that you could intervene if you needed to. Because that's the problem I see is there's
I
a
hear what you're
dog
saying.
and I don't know where the owner is, and I'm now trying to manage a dog and I'm not a dog person. So it's
I appreciate what you're saying. Ed and I talked about this a little bit. We thought that the idea of having something in clear view, no matter if it's short or long or whatever, is because we considered the possibility that when dogs find themselves doing things that may not fit the expectations that are here, it's because in many cases, the people don't know where their dog is. So they don't know what their dog is doing.
Right.
So what this is intended to do is to make sure people know where their dog is, which I think is reasonable. I don't know how to deal with what you said. I like what you said, but if you get down to saying how many feet or how far
Right.
away,
Well, that's why I just said reasonable length to
It could be,
intervene.
it could be
or-
6 feet away, and my dog's this big, and if she's 6 feet away, and I can't catch her, you know what I mean? And I can see her very well.
One thing that we should point out here is that I rather like the DCR regulations. They're very concise. And so for example, this is, parts of this derive from DCR, where we've just interpreted them differently.
Yep.
And unless invited, the owner does not let their dog approach. That's
That's
a
right
recasting from DCR. 'Cause I think if we look at interactions at Kent's, those interactions that happen there between known individuals are all, there's no problem there. It's all the unknown dogs and the tourists and people coming to check it out. So the idea of, metering those interactions or having a protocol around it, have the chance of making it a more pleasant, incident-free experience for anyone. And it's something which the police can explain since it's drafted like this.
Just a quick question to understand it. So this is applying to lands that dogs are allowed to go to.
Yes.
It's not implying that we should now make them all available to dogs. We're not trying to change that.
No.
Right, okay. All right.
So, like in,
Just where it's already allowed,
In-
we're
in
not
the ori-
changing that,
in
okay.
the original version that I put together, I had, town unleash everywhere, and then there's a long set of exceptions for open space areas. And then, that's not good enough,
Complicated.
because there's OCT, there's Conservation Commission, there's state, DCR. So that made more sense than trying to navigate all of that, to just back away from it. And, that, this is primarily for town-related properties. Excuse me.
we thought that it would be helpful at this point if people could put editorial comments right on the paper and give them to us, and then we'll put it into what we consider to be a final draft, unless people want to clarify more things.
Although I do have a question. So, the language, I had, when I first looked at this and with Bob, I was like, can this actually be a regulation? Is there, you know, is there something that we're missing from having it be this wordy, or does it need to be more concise and legalese? I mean, how do we approach making it better?
Well, I have a few comments, if
Sure.
I may.
That might have been premature.
Before you make yours, if I may, I think it is concise.
Okay,
I think it's just different.
yeah,
It's concise in the sense that it puts the responsibility on the dog owner to be accountable. It's concise in the sense that it makes it clear that the nature of what is expected in town center is different from conservation land and town parks, so that there isn't one particular statement that then is forced to be applicable to various different land properties. So I don't have any problem with the and finally, I think it is user-friendly. It's a much more positive, constructive way of going about doing this, and I do not suggest that if what is meant by concise, making it more limited and restrictive, I would want to try to get away from that. Although I appreciate the importance of it, of the spirit of your comment, is, for me, I see this going into a final report as a recommendation. How it then comes into the actual 85-2, I think it would fit, but maybe we do need to talk about that. I understand what you're saying.
Carl?
Okay, so, I have some general kind of, how, kind of things to bear in mind as we let this percolate comments, and then I have some more word-specific. My basic concern about any draft, not just this in particular, is, are we expecting that this is going to be enforced before or after the fact? Right now, we're talking about kind of after-the-fact enforcement, where you come across a situation, something has happened, and it's clear from the situation that the dog owner did not control their dog, and therefore it's kind of like we deduce backwards and we say, okay, you're guilty of not controlling your dog. If we create language that kind of opens up opportunities for enforcing control when nothing has happened, then we get into what I think is territory that we need to be careful about, because there are some dogs who are just utterly innocuous dogs. Luna is a perfect example of that, in my opinion. Luna is just this little sweetie pie. She goes right around the flat. She does her own thing. She is never, ever going to be a problem to anyone, unless that person is like dog phobic or something, which, there are such folks. And I'm concerned whenever I read something, I say, what about the overzealous law enforcement officer who looks at Dave and Luna and says, she's too far away from him? So I want to be careful.
Oh yeah, and she probably failed this because when I say come, she won't come. She stays with me, but she's not going to come. So I'm not doing it for me. I'm just saying as an example,
Yeah, and so now we're just regulating for order, as opposed to regulating to solve a problem. Like, what's the problem is kind of the question that we were asking at the very beginning of this whole thing, and I kind of came back to it at a certain point and said, what's the manifest evil? So in Luna's case, I don't think there's any manifest evil, and I want to be sure that Luna gets left alone in this whole thing. So that's my overall statement. You are free to disagree. I'm not gonna, but I would say in line 2, and other citizens be responsible is what I believe is grammatical there. And in the next to last line in that paragraph, I would say his or her, even though it's wordy rather than their. Again, just for verb and subject agreement. Take it or leave it, it's not worth talking about. More important, in town center, when we get past the parens in the next to last line, or excessive barking, I'm a little unsure about what's excessive to one person or another. I worry that that's a little vague, and that, you know, I don't know. I need to think about that. But then the thing I feel is urgently important is that after that, it says that may be perceived, you have to put in reasonably. That may be reasonably
Oh,
perceived.
yes.
Why don't you just put that in?
I have.
Okay.
But they're gonna go to you, and I want other people to hear it,
Thank you, Carl, that's good.
so they can think about it. So in the next bit, in the third line, it says, this means that an owner is accountable for making sure their dog does not bite, scratch. This, I think, oh, I wish Jennifer were here. This kind of answers her issue, I think, because ultimately, you know, you're gonna be responsible for what your dog does. Even if you're, you know, if your dog's 100 feet away or whatever, she's not here, so let me table that. This is a grammar thing, I just don't like passive constructions. In that last sentence, I would say owners are expected to properly control dog conduct to avoid harm to wildlife and damage to the environment. That's how I would write it, but whatever. I think that in the next line, a dog behaving positively to voice commands and hand signals comes when called and remains sitting or standing beside the owner is a pretty high bar. I think what's important there is that you've got to be able to disengage your dog from a situation. If somebody, if your dog is where, for some reason, your dog should not be and is doing something your dog should not be doing, what's really important is that you're able to get the dog away. Now, if the dog goes running off, ahead of you, my dog likes to go ahead of me. So if my dog really likes to be the scout. So if he scouts off ahead of me, I don't think it's important that he sat or stood next to me. So I would think about whether there's other language that works better there.
Could I reinforce that?
Yeah.
That was the only, I thought it was pretty well written, but that was the only thing that jumped out at me, because I think, to your point, Bob, what you're saying earlier is trying to create a structure that is usable, user-friendly. I think being really specific about voice command and hand signals might be so specific, a lot of dogs would fail it and never ever be a problem. And so I think maybe take that out and really focus on what are the problems. So your next line is great, you give an example, clear view, that's helpful, and then immediately take action, I think.
So strike that
Yeah,
sentence.
yeah. I think, yeah.
Okay, so moving right along to the while walking, the word immediately scares me. I like promptly. I just always look at, what's the overzealous enforcement.
Yeah, I get,
And
good point.
promptly works, it means like now, but it doesn't mean instantaneous. I have I would ask that thought be given to the word inappropriate, only because I had this whole thing with a woman once where she was, actually I've had two women get upset with me because my dog was getting too friendly with their dog. And, in the sense of, kind of a little humpy and stuff. And I want to be sure that, I'm not sure what inappropriate, to one person, inappropriate might be, like, my attitude towards that is like dogs are dogs, so, and yet I understand, and where do you draw the line? I don't know, it's just something to think about. I'm
You
not,
have, you have another word for it?
not offhand, I just think it's worth just giving thought to.
No, that's a great, that would be a great tightening up. Boris, it's quite natural.
And then the last thing is just that unless invited, the owner does not let their dog approach others who wish to elude such contact, who indicate that they wish to elude. I mean, I'm looking at this very suspiciously and kind of, how can people use it to be a pain or use it to be overzealous as enforcement? But if this dog runs up to you, and then you say, I didn't want this dog anywhere near me. Well, it would have been nice if you had just said something first, like, please get him away, which sometimes people do. So I would, who I would have written it, probably approach others who indicate that they wish to elude such conduct.
That's also written in the positive.
Thank you for your suggestions, I think they're
Good.
helpful.
And here,
We're gonna collect those from
You-
everyone, but let's see if
okay.
anyone else has thoughts.
You stepped out and we had a really good discussion
yeah,
about
there's a
something.
lot of great stuff
And
you
you missed it all.
missed. Watch the tape.
I feel like your feedback on the wording is, I don't have a dog, so I don't,
We should bring that back up though, because I think that one of the restriction, what was it we wanted to point out?
Well, you had made a point about your, how far away the dog is.
yeah.
And I just wanted to kind of on the one hand, reassure you in the sense of saying, there is a sentence that says, this means an owner is accountable for making sure their dog does not bite, scratch, or jump upon human beings or other dogs. So, if the dog gets far ahead and the dog's a troublemaker, the owner is going to be responsible.
Not in my case, the cases I have seen, there's no way to hold them responsible.
Well, under this definition, legally, they
Yeah.
would be. And then, so, that brings me back to the initial thing. So if you want to make it so that, it becomes that, hey, police officer, look at that dog's too far ahead of that person. We could try, that's one way to
No,
go.
I
but-
don't think,
Yeah.
I think it's more just, if you're gonna say clear view, immediately in my head, it was like, seeing them jump and attack somebody doesn't help if you're
Right.
not there to,
And there is also
really shoot
this
the
other
action.
requirement, though, that they be, so that if it becomes necessary, they can promptly, I said,
Right.
rather than immediately, take
Right,
action.
right, which, and
So-
promptly would imply you're close enough.
You would
Yeah.
imply that, right,
Yep.
yeah. Okay,
I have a suggestion. We struck inappropriate dog conduct, or was a suggestion. I have somewhat, while walking, the owner is expected to keep their dog in clear view, so if it becomes necessary, they can promptly take action in order to ensure control of the dog.
Just to reinforce the,
We reference what control means above, right?
yes, that's nice.
yeah.
In order to ensure control of the dog, meaning you're close enough that you if you need to, you can take action to ensure control.
And some of this is context dependent too, is another thing, sometimes like Boris and I will go someplace where there's no one, and then I feel more comfortable letting him be further ahead, because
Right.
I figure it's gonna take a while before somebody comes around the corner, and, in that time, I can shorten up the distance between them. So I'd hate to see it be an absolute
That's
thing that
common
had
sense.
no, yeah, right,
Farther ahead, that's right.
okay.
Can we go back to the, sorry, real quick, the town property thing's kind of gnawing on me in terms of define, I think it's a little bit arduous and somewhat complicated to get someone's head wrapped around where that area is.
Where are you referring to?
Town center.
Okay.
Okay? And I understand that we don't want to be more restricted, but I think we should have the conversation where you first started off on this mindset. If that read town-owned property, and then we reference exceptions below, right? So we're defining places where you can let your dog run. Like, these are the places you go to run your dog. If you can, when you reference DCR or a conservation trust, those aren't town-owned properties, right? So, I mean, if there's a long list of places that you guys think that we're getting into the weeds where, you would want to have your dog off a leash on town-owned property, not private property.
Originally, I looked at the open space plan, and it lists all of the properties by all the owners. And, but I like the idea of town-owned property in general, because taking your dog to a town landing or taking your dog to a conservation property, Conservation Commission property, are the two primary vehicles for someone to get out and take their dog off leash.
Right.
So,
I have another comment about this, which is that, and you and I have talked about this before, I just wonder whether the leashing in the town is necessary, just because I think, where there's any danger, any sane dog owner leashes their dog, but I think there's also, I can imagine this being a little bit of a tough sell at town meeting. I think leash law is a little bit of a third rail kind of issue in the town. It hasn't fared well in the past, and it might make it harder to get what I consider to be the important part in my understanding of all this, which is the town conservation lands and town parks piece through, even though it's common sense. Some people may see this as the nose of the camel for a leash law, and I don't know, that's just something to think
So
about
are you
too.
suggesting that that part be taken out?
It's something to consider,
It's an option, I think.
yeah.
I mean, I think if we step back from this, and when we were listening to some of the requirements, enforceability is lacking under 85-2 as it currently stands. That was my understanding from our discussions.
Yeah, that's been said a lot, and I guess, again, that goes back to the kind of before the fact, after the fact, like,
That's what the chief of police said.
I know he said it, and I get it, and I'm still a little mystified by it. I don't want to kind of open that door
Right,
completely,
okay.
but there's times when I spend time going around my head around that. Let's see where we are in the agenda, and let's ask ourselves the question whether, well, first we should, so
Could
we
we-
do a motion on this or something?
Well, I think we have good information here that Ed and I can bring a final back.
Really good, that's good.
Yeah.
And if everyone could pass their editorial comments, so we'll have a record of them.
And do you want to go through some kind of motion process with this right now?
I don't think.
Let's,
I don't
we're not ready.
Yeah.
We
I
get the
think we'll
drafts
bring it
back.
Not ready to be voted.
Okay, because
I
we
think
Have
moved
the
to
final-
bring something else back, so
I
I'm
think
just,
what we'll
but
do is
that's
we'll bring
okay.
back
I don't
a
need
couple of
motion.
versions of it based on the feedback we've gotten.
No, I think we should come back with one
Okay.
version and vote
Yeah.
and get it
One,
done.
okay.
Couple.
Yeah,
All right.
we're not
Bad idea,
giving,
bad
from-
idea.
and there's been no motion for you to eliminate anything, so I think until otherwise it stands to edit those.
Okay,
Okay.
so,
And if I may just quickly say, notice that when we made comments that are based on a scenario, and other people could easily come in and say, well, my dog does this and this, and it would not fit. And someone else could come in and say, my dog is this kind, and it does fit. What's important about the scenarios is it helps sort of enlighten us about the possibilities of word choice and rearrangement of what we're saying, so that we do the best we can to address the problem that the scenario suggests, rather than the specifics of the scenario.
Agreed, I think there's also, you have to be conscious that if you go too vague, it leaves the enforcement end of it, it's such a gray area that we're not,
That's right.
it's useless.
It's a delicate dance, and I hope we're close to it on this.
Good.
We're closer than we've ever been, thank you for doing that.
Thank you, guys.
great.
Do we have everyone's?
It's 7:30.
Thank you.
All right, so we're skipping the minutes.
Yep.
So we could either just create the agenda and adjourn, or we could take, maybe just a few minutes to at least open the door on Skake It. Because you've sort of hinted that there might be a possibility for change there, and, I don't know, would people be amenable to just taking a short, 10,
Can we
12?
keep it to 10 minutes?
Yeah,
Okay.
Sure.
I gotta go.
all right. So,
Been dangling this carrot for a while.
yes, you have, I know.
So I was part of the original incorporation of creating consistent dates in town. At one point, and it seems like we're going full circle, there was a time when every place on here had different dates. And it was very difficult for people to get their head wrapped around, especially for enforcement, because every time you'd see them, you'd have to educate them. No, actually, this spot has these dates, this spot has this date. It wasn't beaches as a whole. And when you start getting involved with the oversand vehicle program, there's sections of beach where times and leash laws and, you know, to say the least, it's confusing. But I understand you know, the, how much it means to the community to have access to these beaches. To be honest, and I know we're not talking about Nauset tonight, but with this, the complexity of the situation with shorebirds and the management of keeping that section of beach open, I have no room to wiggle, and to be honest, and it's not only my call, but I wouldn't support any changes at this point, because it's taken us a long time to get our heads wrapped around keeping those beaches open, and I would stand my ground on that. I think we're being more restrictive than we need to be for Skagit Beach and Rock Harbor. But for the reason that we don't have historic or regular shorebird nesting going on at Skagit or Rock Harbor. That's not to say that there couldn't be the occasional nest out there. We will still monitor those beaches and take action consistent with the guidelines. So you guys understand the guidelines for shorebirds. This is how it reads. This is the regulations that I'm required to operate under. Pets should be leashed and under control of their owners at all times from April 1st to August 31st on beaches where piping plovers or terns are present or have traditionally nested. Pets should be prohibited on these beaches from April 1 through August 31st if, based on observations and experience, pet owners fail to keep pets leashed and under control. Okay? And so you understand the repercussions of dogs or pets with shorebirds. The birds are trying to nest, get comfortable, set up shop, lay their eggs, and move on. The more the disturbance from animals, they abandon the nest and they re-nest, and they start the clock over, and next thing you know, the same pair of plovers has been trying to lay their eggs and incubate them and hatch them and fledge them, and instead of taking 28 days, it's now taken the whole summer and the beach has been closed. So there's serious repercussions to this operating under these guidelines. That being said, I think we're playing it a little safe at Skagit, but I am a firm believer that there's a user conflict here in terms of just keeping it wide open through the summer or even giving it the ability to have morning dates. I think at our public choice gems of of the town of Orleans, there's something to be said for keeping the dogs and the possible waste off of those beaches. My suggestion for Skagit Beach would be to go back to the old dates of the Friday before Memorial Day through Labor Day. And I would do the same for Rock Harbor.
Woot! That is fantastic in my book.
What are Nauset's dates?
Nauset's April 1st through Labor Day, consistent with the guidelines.
Okay.
Then if you want to start getting into the Oversand program, it gets a little more complicated, but we'll just
No,
generalize it.
that's okay. I'm fine with just
No.
Nauset.
So I'm sorry, and you're saying Friday and then day after Labor Day?
Friday before Memorial Day through Labor Day,
Through Labor Day,
inclusive of Labor Day.
which is what it was.
Yep.
One-
Now,